I'm Jerome Vincent, and I write scripts for corporate events, videos, training films, that sort of thing, as well as I've done 13 radio plays, a film, some children's TV, and I'm doing a book at the moment. Script writing is very important because it's the foundation of the communication. What I always say is it's the cheapest way to make mistakes, in the sense that you can try out ideas on paper and work out how you're going to get your message across. And then if it's done well, what you get back from that is buy-in from the audience. And it could be literally buy-in. You know, they pay you money, they buy your product, or they sign on to whatever it is. There's a lot of research that shows that employees within companies, if they're communicated to in a creative way and the communication proves that there's been thought and that they've been consulted in one sense, the audience has been respected, that they work better, they take the messages on board, and so therefore the money you've invested in that communication has paid dividends. But if a communication is thrown together or has no thought for the audience, i.e. it's boring or it's just dull and too complex, then the audience think you don't respect them. You can't disrespect your audience, because if you disrespect your audience, you've wasted your money. And that's why creativity is so important, and why starting with a good script is so important, and a good creative process, because that will then pay dividends in the end. Corporates are often thought to be dull. The way I've always approached it is that what we're dealing with is audiences, and these audiences sit in front of EastEnders every night, and ITV dramas and documentaries where people go around the world and lots of money's been spent on them, and to them something that appears on a screen is still entertainment in a strange way, even though it's corporate. The principle I go on is that the audience doesn't have two settings in their heads. They don't have television and cinema and theatre on the one hand, and it's just a corporate, therefore I'm going to accept something that's so boring that I'm asleep by the fourth bullet point, the fourth PowerPoint slide. The principle I go is will I be interested in this? Will I enjoy this? And how can I make it more interesting than it already is, if it is interesting to begin with? Which most things are, actually. Most things have, again, it goes back to stories. There's a story in everything. So you then try and take the story and make it interesting. When I've done radio plays and everything, you've got to think that the audience are in their cars or in their kitchens or at home doing something else. What's going to attract them to this play, and what's going to keep them listening for 45 minutes or an hour? And at the end of it, you want them to ring up the BBC and say this was brilliant. But in many ways, they're an easier audience to please than corporate audiences. So actually you have to work harder. So putting creativity into it is very important. I think there are ways in which a client can contribute to the creative process and speed it up, and also save time. And that's by having a good hard look at why they want to do the communication, why video works in that context, who their audience are, and what they want their audience to do. What do you want the audience to think while they're watching, and what you want them to do once they've watched and tell other people? And what are the 3 headlines that you want them to have retained, say an hour later, 2 days later, 3 weeks later? And what ideas attract you? Consider a documentary approach, a very straight corporate approach, maybe a drama approach, or a comedy approach, or a serious approach, and then be open to the people who, like me and the producer and the director, to come up to you and say, actually, why don't we do it this way, which might be completely out of left field. But it's always good to consider an offbeat approach, or an approach you've never thought of. So if you're having ideas within your team, before you talk to the creative, do what creatives do, which is brainstorm. I think it's important that people think about times when something has resonated with them. So you've read a book, and when you've finished it, you think, oh, that's meant a lot to me. You don't think of the cover, the pages, the words. You think about the emotional impact of that book or that film. And that's communication. And in corporates, it should be exactly the same. So whatever your message is, it has a meaning to the people who are watching. So if it's a customer who wants to buy a service or a device, then you can't just go on about the service and all its features and benefits, although that's important. You've got to start from the premise that it means something, and everything has a meaning. Every single thing. I haven't come across a subject in a corporate that doesn't have a human meaning behind it that you can distill out of it. Well, when we get a corporate brief, the most important thing is to identify the core messages that the client wants to get across and what they want the audience to do once that message has been communicated, how they want them to feel, how they want to act, how they want them to go forward, because that's the point of doing anything. So I focus in on 2 or 3 main headlines and work with that in mind at the heart of the communication, whatever it might be. Even if it's an hour long or 3 minutes long or even 30 seconds long, it's best to keep to 3 main things that you want to get across, and then everything will come off that. Things often occur straight away, and sometimes that's good, that the initial inspiration is often an instinct which you can't better, but it's always good to challenge that. The first idea might be the best idea, but it's never good just to say, right, let's go with the first one. You have to challenge it, and I like the fact that the production team, the director, the producer can challenge it, but also it's important the client does too, and the client just doesn't sit there and say, well, if you say it's a drama, then let's do a drama, or if you say it's a documentary or an event based upon James Bond or something, that's the best idea. They have to say what they feel about it, and it's a negotiation, because the one thing about creativity in the corporate sector, as well as actually in broadcast or films or theatre, is that it's all a collaboration. It's not all on the shoulder of the writer or the director or the producer. Everybody's involved, so everybody should make a contribution. The time and money spent on the script will show on the screen. It's the foundation of any good communication, because that's when the energy and the ideas and the creativity and the meaning come out. And some production companies can get carried away, and clients as well, can get carried away on what it looks like and how they're going to spend quite a lot on lighting or a particular actor or a presenter or graphics or computer-generated effects. But if those things are wrapped around something that is banal and dull, they will look banal and dull, because you cannot make a good piece of communication without a creative core that comes from the script. And I think what the successful production companies do is they ensure that the client understands that at the beginning and involves the client in the creative process and enjoys the creative process. And I think that's why I like working with SugarSnap, because you're free to think, free to be creative, even if that creativity has to be tempered sometimes because of reality, but you're allowed to be free. And I think that then that comes across on the screen at the critical point, which is when the audience interact with it. You can never be sure that something will work, but you have to go with an idea and do it the best you can do it, and the audience will appreciate that, and 99% of the time the communication will work.